The Dragon's Choice. The evacuation sirens had been wailing for 3 hours when I first saw her. Lieutenant Max Reynolds, supply officer, expendable personnel, that's what my file said. I was hauling ammunition crates through the rubble of what used to be downtown Denver when the sky split open with a sound like thunder being tortured. The Vraxian mothership descended through the clouds, black as obsidian and twice the size of a city block. But it wasn't the ship that made my blood freeze. It was what emerged from its belly. The dragon was magnificent and terrible, wings spanning easily 200 feet across. Her scales caught the dying sunlight, shifting from deep charcoal to silver blue as she moved. This wasn't some mythical creature from ancient stories, this was Vraxian bioengineering at its most horrific. They'd grown her in their labs, shaped her DNA to be the perfect city killer. Reynolds. Sergeant Torres grabbed my shoulder. Move your ass. That thing's heading straight for the refugee center. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to follow the retreating soldiers, to get as far away as possible. Instead, I found myself dropping the ammo crate and walking toward the dragon. She landed in the middle of the street with a sound like an earthquake, her massive claws gouging trenches in the asphalt. Up close, I could see the Vraxian control implants glowing red along her neck, technological leashes meant to make her obedient to their commands. The dragon's head turned toward me, and our eyes met. I'd expected rage, hunger, the mindless fury of a weapon. Instead, I saw intelligence. Pain. And something that looked almost like hope. Easy, girl, I whispered, taking another step forward. My hands were shaking, but I kept them visible, palms open. I know you don't want to do this. The dragon's massive head tilted, studying me with eyes like molten gold. The control implants pulsed more rapidly, and she flinched, a sound of distress rumbling from her throat. They were trying to override her hesitation, force her to attack. Fight them, I said, louder now. You're stronger than their machines. Behind me, I could hear Torres shouting orders, probably calling for backup or heavy weapons. The smart play would have been to let them handle it. But something about the dragon's pain called to something in me, maybe because I knew what it felt like to be used by people who saw you as expendable. The dragon's eyes widened, and for a moment, the red glow of the implants flickered. She took a step closer, lowering her great head until we were face to face. That's it, I breathed. You're not their weapon. You're your own person. The implants flared bright red, and the dragon roared in agony. But instead of attacking, she did something that would change everything. She bowed. The massive head lowered until her forehead touched the broken asphalt at my feet. The gesture was unmistakable, universal, submission, alliance, recognition. From the Vraxian ship above came a sound I'd never heard before, alien voices raised in what could only be shock and fury. Their perfect weapon had just chosen a side, and it wasn't theirs. The dragon raised her head and looked at me again. This time, there was no pain in her eyes, only determination. The control implant sparked once, twice, then went dark. Well, I said, reaching out to touch the warm scales of her muzzle, I guess we're in this together now. Her response was a gentle rumble that I somehow understood meant agreement. Above us, the Vraxian ship began to descend, and I knew our real troubles were just beginning. But for the first time in my military career, I wasn't facing them alone. The bond awakens. The name came to me like a whisper in my mind, Kaida. I'd been sitting in the emergency briefing room for 6 hours, field commanders and xenobiologists arguing over what to do with Earth's newest and most unlikely ally. The dragon, Kaida, though I hadn't told anyone the name yet, waited in the hangar bay, too large for any building but somehow managing to fold herself into a space barely adequate for her size. The creature is clearly defective, General Harrison was saying, his weathered face tight with distrust. The Vraxians will try to reactivate their control systems. We need to study it before. She's not an hit, I interrupted, earning sharp looks from around the table. And her name is Kaida. Lieutenant Reynolds, the general's voice carried a warning. You've been through a traumatic experience. No one expects you to think clearly about. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, sir. I stood, ignoring protocol. She chose to protect us. That makes her one of ours. Colonel Martinez leaned forward. Reynolds, you spent 20 minutes with this creature. You can't possibly understand. 37 minutes, I corrected. And I understand that she's been trying to communicate with me since the moment we met. The room fell silent. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead xenobiologist, looked up from her tablet. Communication? What kind of communication? I struggled to find words for something that felt so natural. Images, mostly. Emotions. She's been showing me things, memories of being created, trained, forced to hurt people she didn't want to hurt. She's been trying to tell me that she's been waiting for someone who would listen. That's impossible, Chen said, but her tone was curious rather than dismissive. The Vraxian bioweapons don't have higher cognitive functions. They're essentially very sophisticated animals. Then explain how she disabled her own control implants, I shot back. Explain how she knew exactly where to find me after the briefing started, or how she's been pacing the hangar in the exact pattern I've been doodling on this notepad. I showed them the paper, a series of connected loops I'd been drawing unconsciously. Through the hangar's reinforced windows, we could see Kaida walking the same looping path. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, General Harrison spoke. Even if this bond is real, we can't trust it. The Vraxians could be using her to. An explosion rocked the building, and the lights flickered. Emergency klaxons began wailing. Vraxian strike team, Martinez reported, checking his comm, they're trying to reach the hangar. My blood turned to ice. They're coming for her. All units, defensive positions, Harrison ordered. Reynolds, you're to remain. I was already moving, ignoring the shouts behind me. The corridors were chaos, soldiers running, civilians being evacuated, the acrid smell of plasma fire drifting through the ventilation. I reached the hangar just as the first Vraxian soldiers blasted through the reinforced doors. Kaida was waiting for them. The dragon that had seemed almost gentle with me was a force of nature unleashed. Her roar shook the entire building as she reared up, wings spread wide, her massive tail sweeping 3 soldiers into the wall with bone-crushing force. Plasma bolts struck her scales and scattered harmlessly. But there were too many of them, and they had weapons designed specifically for her recapture. Neural disruptors that made her stumble, energy nets that glowed with the same sickly light as her broken control implants. Kaida! I shouted, running toward the battle. She turned at the sound of my voice, and in that moment of distraction, the Vraxian struck. A disruptor bolt caught her in the chest, and she went down hard, her massive form crashing into a stack of supply crates. Rage filled me, pure, burning fury unlike anything I'd ever felt. I grabbed a plasma rifle from a fallen soldier and started firing, not caring about cover or tactics, only about reaching her. You want her? I screamed at the Vraxian soldiers. You'll have to go through me. And then something extraordinary happened. As I fought my way toward Kaida, I felt her strength flowing into me. My aim became perfect, my reflexes impossibly fast. It was as if we were sharing more than just determination, we were sharing our very life force. Together, we drove the Vraxians back. Together, we stood victorious in the wreckage of the hangar. As the smoke cleared and reinforcements arrived, I knelt beside Kaida's great head. She was breathing hard but alert, her golden eyes fixed on mine. I felt it too, I whispered. Whatever this is between us, it's real. Her gentle rumble of agreement was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. But as I looked up at the hole the Vraxians had blown in the hangar wall, I knew this was just the beginning. They wouldn't stop coming for her. And now, they'd be coming for me too. The escape. The door hissed shut behind me with that distinctive pneumatic wheeze that seemed to say, "You're properly screwed now, mate." Not the mechanical click of a conventional lock, this was the sound of a triple reinforced, vacuum-sealed, probably alien tech containment chamber designed to keep things in rather than out. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, Max, I muttered, spinning to face the featureless metal surface where moments ago there had been an exit. This is exactly how I planned to spend my Tuesday, trapped in an alien holding cell. 3 days had passed since the hangar battle. 3 days of interrogations, accusations, and finally the trumped-up charges of treason against the interplanetary regime. The Vraxians had convinced Earth's government that Qaeda and I were a threat to the peace negotiations. The room was sterile white on 3 sides, with that stubborn door on the 4th. But it was the massive display panel that caught my attention, showing the devastation outside in high definition. New Denver's crumbling skyline, shrouded in gray mist, and in the foreground, the scene that had landed me here, Qaeda, magnificent wings spread against the ashen sky, standing protectively behind me while I faced down Vraxian soldiers. Comfortable accommodations, Lieutenant Reynolds. The voice crackled through a hidden speaker, the Vraxian's attempt at English still awkwardly stilted. I've stayed in worse airrooms, I called back, examining the walls for any weakness. Though your minibar selection is disappointing. I pressed my ear against the cool surface, tapping gently along the baseboard. The first rule of imprisonment, check every edge, every corner, every junction. My fingers caught on something, a slight irregularity in the seam. A small panel gave way under pressure, revealing a maintenance access point with peculiar blue-green wiring that pulsed with internal light. Your persistent nature only delays the inevitable, the Vraxian commented. The judgment awaits you. Do I get a lawyer, at least? Or is this more of a summary execution situation? No response, just the hum of air circulation. I turned my attention to the vents along the bottom edge of the opposite wall. The smell was odd, like ozone and cinnamon and something metallic. Then came the knocking. 3 distinct raps from within the door itself, followed by 2 quick ones. Hello. I called cautiously. Is someone inside the wall? Reynolds, you fool, came a muffled voice, unmistakably human. The vents are cycling the air mixture. You have approximately 8 minutes before the oxygen drops below sustainable levels. Who is this? Commander Novak. I've been tracking your signal since they brought you in. My signal? The tracking implant in your jacket. You think the Resistance just handed out vintage clothing for fun? I fumbled at the collar of my denim jacket, my father's old coat, until my fingers found a hard, rice grain-sized object embedded in the fabric. Listen carefully, Novak continued. I can't get you out, the door's controlled from central security. But I can help you survive long enough for the rescue team. There's a rescue team. Of course there is. You're the Dragon Keeper, the only human Qaeda has ever bonded with. You think we'd let the Vraxians execute you? 23 minutes until rescue. 8 minutes of air. I needed to survive 15 minutes of oxygen deprivation. Look to the scales, Reynolds, Novak's voice was hurried now. The answer is in the scales. Then silence. Scales, dragon scales. I studied Qaeda's image on the wall, focusing on the intricate pattern of her hide. There, at the junction of her neck and shoulder, was a deliberate arrangement, 5 scales forming a distinct pentagon shape. I searched the room with renewed purpose. On my hands and knees, I found them, 5 small indentations arranged in a pentagon pattern where the floor met the wall beneath the display. I pressed them in the same order as Qaeda's scales. A soft click, and the section of floor slid away, revealing a compartment containing an oxygen mask and tank. 20 minutes of air supply. More than enough. You beautiful, clever dragon, I whispered. There was something else in the compartment, a metallic disc about the size of a poker chip, one side blank, the other bearing Qaeda's silhouette. As the air grew thin, I secured the mask and turned my attention to the display panel. In the bottom right corner was a small circular indentation. I pressed the disc against it, and the display transformed into a control interface. Vraxian symbols I couldn't understand, but also universal icons that transcended language. The disk wasn't just a token, it was an authorization key. The microscopic Vraxian symbols etched around Kaida's outline matched a sequence on the screen. I held the disk against the screen and manipulated the ventilation controls, setting them to their lowest setting. Warning symbols flashed as I confirmed the command. The interface went dark, then flashed green. Emergency protocols activated. The door behind me began to cycle open with a soft hiss. Reynolds. Novak's voice came from the corridor. Move. We have maybe 2 minutes before they realize what happened. I stumbled out of the cell, still wearing the oxygen mask, to find a woman in resistance gear waiting for me. The rescue team? I gasped. That would be me, she grinned. Now come on. We have a dragon to collect and a war to finish. As alarms began wailing throughout the detention facility, I followed Commander Novak toward freedom, toward Kaida, and toward a future I was finally ready to fight for. The Resistance. The underground bunker was a maze of converted subway tunnels, their walls lined with salvaged equipment and the determined faces of Earth's last free fighters. But none of that mattered the moment I saw Kaida. She was waiting in the main cavern, her massive form somehow managing to look graceful despite the cramped space. The moment she sensed my presence, her great head turned toward me, and I felt that familiar warmth flood through our bond. Max, she said, and I nearly stumbled. Not spoke, dragons don't have vocal cords designed for human speech. But her voice was clear in my mind, warm and slightly amused. You were worried I couldn't talk to you properly? Yes, actually. I approached slowly, still amazed by her presence. How long have you been able to do this? Since the moment we bonded. I was waiting for you to be ready to hear me. Commander Novak watched our reunion with fascination. The telepathic link is stronger than we thought. This changes everything. How so? I asked, finally reaching Kaida and placing my hand on her warm scales. Show him, Kaida said gently. Novak led us deeper into the bunker, where a massive tactical display showed the current state of the war. It wasn't good. Red markers indicated Vraxian-controlled territories, nearly 70% of the planet. Blue markers showed human resistance cells, scattered and isolated. They're winning, Novak said simply. Have been since they arrived. Their technology is superior, their numbers overwhelming. But they made one critical mistake. They created Kaida, I realized. They created a weapon capable of destroying cities, but they gave her a consciousness. And consciousness, as it turns out, comes with choice. Novak gestured to the display. Every Vraxian bioweapon was grown from the same base template. Same neural patterns, same potential for sentience. Kaida's mental voice was sad. My siblings. They're still trapped, still being used as weapons. But if we can break their conditioning. An army of dragons fighting for humanity instead of against it, I breathed. Exactly. But it has to be you, Reynolds. The bond you share with Kaida is unique, a resonance frequency that can be transmitted to others of her kind. If you can get close enough to the other dragons. I can free them, I finished. But how? The Vraxians aren't going to let me walk up to their bioweapons. Novak smiled grimly. That's where the plan gets interesting. There's a Vraxian biofacility orbiting Earth, their main production center. They're creating a new generation of dragons there, bigger and more powerful than anything they've made before. A direct assault would be suicide, I protested. Not an assault, Kaida interjected. Infiltration. I can get you inside. How? The answer came not in words but in images transmitted through our bond. Kaida could carry me through space, her natural abilities enhanced by the Vraxian bioengineering. She could survive in vacuum, could fly faster than any human spacecraft. You want to ride a dragon through space to board an alien space station, I said slowly. That's either the most brilliant plan ever conceived, or the most insane. Probably both, Novak admitted. But it's the only shot we have. Over the next week, we prepared. The Resistance provided me with a modified environmental suit capable of surviving in space, while Kaida and I practiced our mental connection, learning to share not just thoughts but perceptions and reflexes. The night before the mission, I sat with Kaida in the cavern, both of us aware that we might not survive what was coming. Are you afraid? I asked her. Terrified, she admitted. But not of dying. I'm afraid of failing my siblings, of leaving them trapped in darkness. We won't fail, I promised. We can't. She lowered her great head until her forehead touched mine. Then we fly together, Max, whatever comes. The launch was at dawn. I secured myself to a harness system we'd rigged along Kaida's back, checked my suit seals one final time, and nodded to Novak. Bring them home, she said simply. Kaida spread her wings, and with a sound like thunder, we launched into the morning sky. The ground fell away beneath us, and within minutes we were climbing through the atmosphere toward the stars. As Earth shrank below us and the Vraxian biofacility grew larger ahead, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. We were about to attempt something that had never been done before, a human and dragon flying together into the heart of enemy territory. But as I felt Kaida's strength flowing through our bond, I knew we had something the Vraxians had never understood, the power of choice, freely given and freely shared. The real battle was about to begin. The dragon's liberation. The Vraxian biofacility hung in space like a metallic tumor, all twisted corridors and organic curves that hurt to look at directly. Kaida approached it silently, her natural stealth capabilities enhanced by our shared focus. 12 dragons, she whispered in my mind as we drew closer. I can feel them all. They're sleeping. Sedated? Worse. Suppressed. Their consciousness is being held down artificially. Her mental voice carried a pain that made my chest ache. They don't even know they exist. We found an airlock on the facility's underside, clearly designed for dragon-sized entries. Kaida pressed herself against it, and I worked frantically with the Vraxian access codes we'd stolen. The lock cycled open with a soft hiss. Inside, the facility was a nightmare of biological and technological integration. Corridors pulsed with veins of light, and the air itself seemed alive. But it was the central chamber that took my breath away. 12 dragons floated in suspension tanks, each one as magnificent as Kaida but utterly still. Control implants glowed along their necks like chains of red stars, and monitoring equipment tracked their vital signs with clinical precision. My siblings, Kaida breathed, landing carefully in the chamber's center. Vraxian technicians scrambled for alarms, but Kaida's roar sent them fleeing. We had minutes, maybe less, before security arrived. How do we wake them? I asked, moving toward the nearest tank. The same way you woke me, Kaida replied. Show them they have a choice. I approached the first dragon, smaller than Kaida, with scales that shifted from green to gold. Her eyes were closed, but as I placed my hand on the tank's surface, they flickered open. The moment our eyes met, I felt it, the spark of recognition, of consciousness awakening. Through Kaida, I projected the feeling of freedom, of choice, of standing together against oppression. The dragon's eyes widened, and her control implants began to flicker. That's it, I whispered. You're not their weapon. You're your own person. One by one, I moved through the chamber, making eye contact with each sleeping dragon. Each time, I felt the moment of awakening, the sudden blaze of consciousness throwing off artificial restraints. But as the 12th dragon's eyes opened, alarms began wailing throughout the facility. Security breach in Biolab 7, a mechanical voice announced. Initiating containment protocols. The chamber's doors sealed, and gas began hissing from vents in the ceiling. Around us, the 12 dragons were stirring in their tanks, but they were still partially sedated, still trapped. The control systems, Kaida said urgently. There, the central console. I ran to the complex array of Vraxian biotechnology, my hands flying over controls I barely understood. But through our bond, Kaida guided me, showing me which systems controlled the suspension tanks, which ones maintained the artificial consciousness suppression. Max, she said suddenly, her mental voice tight with warning. Company. The sealed doors exploded inward, and Vraxian soldiers poured in, led by a figure I recognized from intelligence briefings, General Vortak, architect of the Dragon Project. The human who corrupted our weapon, he said in his mechanical English. You will watch as we reclaim what was stolen. Plasma bolts filled the air, but Kaida was already moving, her massive form shielding me as I worked desperately at the controls. Each system I shut down brought another dragon closer to consciousness, but there were too many safeguards, too many backups. Then I felt it, other minds touching mine. The awakening dragons, still trapped but no longer suppressed, were adding their strength to ours. Through Kaida, through me, they reached out to each other, creating a network of consciousness that the Vraxians had never anticipated. Together, we overrode the containment systems. 12 suspension tanks cracked open simultaneously, and 12 dragons awakened to their first taste of true freedom. The chamber erupted into chaos. Newly awakened dragons, magnificent and furious, turned on their creators with a rage that shook the entire facility. General Vortak's confident expression crumbled as his perfect weapons chose their own side. Impossible, he snarled. They are programmed to obey. Programming, I said, helping Kaida to her feet as the other dragons systematically dismantled their prison, doesn't stand a chance against free will. The evacuation was swift and beautiful. 13 dragons, flying in formation through space toward Earth, carrying with them the promise of a changed war. As we descended through the atmosphere, I could see the Vraxian positions below beginning to retreat, their strategy crumbling as their own weapons turned against them. 6 months later, I stood in the rebuilt Denver, watching Kaida and her siblings playing in the sky above. The Vraxians had withdrawn from Earth, their invasion force crippled by the loss of their bioweapons and the sudden appearance of 13 very angry dragons fighting for humanity. No regrets? Kaida asked, landing beside me with her usual grace. I thought about my old life as a forgettable supply officer, about the moment I first saw her in the sky, about everything that had led us here. None at all, I said, reaching up to touch her warm scales. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. She rumbled her agreement, and together we watched the sun set over a free world, where dragons and humans had learned that the strongest bonds are forged not through force, but through choice. The end.